everybody. I'm Marty Hockenberg, and I am the founder of Gears and Gadgets and the president of Hockenberg Search and Outplacement and Job Search Coaching firm. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your really busy day to join us today. I am really excited to welcome you to our kickoff 2020 program, first program of the year for Gears and Gadgets. If you are a manufacturing business owner or a manufacturing executive, you are definitely in the right place. How many of you have been to Gears and Gadgets before? Just raise your hand. I'm always curious to know. It's fabulous. Look at all of our friends have come back. This is so great. Thank you so much. And then again, how many of you are new to Gears and Gadgets? Fantastic. Welcome. Well, I hope that next time you'll be raising the hand for those who have been here before. And thank you all for your support. We are really looking forward to another entertaining and informative economic forecast by Dean King Banaian, who is backed by popular demand for the fourth year in a row. This program marks our 9th year and our 36th Gears and Gadgets program, thanks to your continued support. Together, we have definitely created the premier networking group for manufacturing professionals, and the synergies that we have created have resulted in manufacturing companies here doing business together. We have manufacturing executives securing great and better career opportunities, and business owners finding solutions to challenges that face your manufacturing company. Now, Gears could not happen without the generous and ongoing support of our platinum sponsors. Now, as you might know, I used to be a recruiter, but I am a recovering recruiter. Now I do job search coaching, but I still recruit for great sponsors because I recruit and vet the best sponsor team you'll ever want to see in one place. And these are service providers that provide excellent service with integrity and experience to you, our manufacturing business owners. So each sponsor has the Good Housekeeping Hockenberg seal of approval. And I hope that when you meet them that you will consider engaging them to help your company grow. So I'd like to at this time thank our sponsors, the Resultants, DSNB and Business Advisors, Rock Island Wealth Management, Core Talent, Carlson Partners, and Platinum Bank. Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you. Now at this point, I would like to personally introduce you to 3 of our sponsors and ask each of them individually to come to the podium for their sponsor spotlight. First, I would like to ask Adam Johnston, who is the president of Banaian Marketing, to come up. Adam and his team have done a fabulous job on rebranding Gears and Gadgets. Did you notice our new logo and our new look? Well, that is thanks to Adam and his team. And you all have a copy of the guidepost here. Please, I really encourage you to take that. Adam and his team did also create that. So Adam?
Thanks, Marty. She is very strict on her 1-minute commercial. So I had 10 years in Toastmasters, so I'm going to try to hit the 50 seconds I have left. We're Banaian Marketing Web Design, and you can see one of the things that we do is rebranding. So we design and develop corporate identity, logos, brochures, trade show graphics, obviously websites. But one thing I did want to touch on is content marketing. So we do a lot of content marketing. And what is that? That's writing blogs, white papers, case studies, things that many of the people in the manufacturing world have a hard time doing. Their engineers don't want to do it. The salespeople definitely don't want to do it. And so we do that for them. We interview those engineers or those salespeople, and we'll write papers, write blogs, and then we share those on social media. So Adam Johnson, Banaian Marketing and Web Design. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.
Is that 1 minute? Pretty close.
Maybe Adam will autograph his copy of the guide. And Dr. Banaian too. I'm not going to. So at this time, I would like to invite Mick Hannafin, Area Vice President at Gallagher Insurance, to come on up.
employee benefits can be really frustrating and confusing and downright maddening at times throughout the year. So our team at Gallagher is focused not only on bringing you the same benefits as you would expect from other brokers, but we really focus on 4 different areas. The first area is how do we build a better benefits program for you to attract and retain in a tough market for employees. The second is building better health for your employees, and that is actually possible. It's something that we actually put a number on and explain that number to you and it's important about the health of your population. We bring a more efficient healthcare program to you. So we're rolling out a program where we actually can quadrant based on both cost and quality by provider. And what we're seeing is about a 30% savings on healthcare for companies when we roll that out. And then we're really trying to simplify the compliance. There's a myriad of compliance issues, both state and federal, that you face daily that we have attorneys on staff to help you with. So one of the things we do when we do this is put it in your vernacular, in your language. A lean process when we go through this, and we also attempt to buy healthcare in the same way as you buy everything else through supply chain purchasing, establishing what the cost is, and then holding people accountable to that. So we did put on the table some case studies if you're interested in how that works and how that applies to companies like yours. Feel free to grab one and give us a call. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Appreciate it. Thank you. And then we have a brand new sponsor, Gary Braun from Pivotal Advisors.
Thank you, Marty. This is the first time I think I've ever written out. I don't know if I'll stick to it. So, how many people out here are just overjoyed with the performance of their sales team? Show of hands. One hand. Okay. That's the problem that we solved. So a lot of you guys got into business, you saw growth of your company over a period of time, and you got to a certain point where that growth has slowed down and plateaued. That's what we address. You got to that point because you got really good products or services, you had a core group of people who would do anything for you, that wore lots of hats, all that stuff's in their head. But then it becomes really difficult to get to that next level. It becomes difficult to add that next person on to regain that momentum and get going. We've helped about 300 or so companies, most of them right here in the Twin Cities metro area, get to that next level of growth by putting in repeatable process, by putting in accountability, by putting in systems and structure, and that's what we do. So I'll keep it really short right there. If you want to learn more about it, come talk to me or Kyle. Raise your hand real quick. Kyle, later, we'd love to learn more about your business and see if we can help you.
Thank you very much, sponsors, and again, I encourage you to meet them during the happy hour. And by the way, sponsors, don't feel so bad. I have about 10 clients in the room today, and they know about that 1-minute commercial. Am I right? So thank you so much. And now, I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. King Banaian. He is, and how many of you have seen Dr. Banaian before? Raise your hand. See, that's how awesome he is. He's back, and you guys are here too. Dean Banaian is a professor in the Department of Economics and Dean of the School of Public Affairs at St. Cloud University. He holds a PhD in economics from the Claremont Graduate School, and he has consulted at the central banks of Ukraine, Egypt, and Macedonia, and the ministries of finance of Indonesia, Macedonia, and Armenia. Dean Banaian is author of 2 books and more than 40 articles and book chapters discussing monetary policy and political economy. A former state representative from St. Cloud, he is co-author of the St. Cloud Quarterly Business Report and hosts a radio program in Minneapolis. Professor Banaian's presentation today, his topic is manufacturing, trade, and growth in Minnesota, the outlook for 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dean Banaian.
I just realized I forgot to put this on before we started talking, so now let me let me sort of adjust on the fly. There's my sound. I don't want you to struggle to hear me in the back, so I'm just going to put it on automatically rather than, can you hear me in the back? Okay? Because there's always one person who can't hear you in the back but doesn't want to admit it. Right? So just a word of advice after doing these things for many years, my counsel to you is always put on the microphone if one is offered. So anyway, thank you so much and welcome. And it's right, Marty, that it's always thrilling to come back because when I give the first talk to some new group, my fear is always, if I never see them again, I'll never know how bad I was. And so when you get invited back a fourth time, you kind of think, well, it must be somewhere around the target because they seem to either that or maybe they just couldn't find anybody else. I've decided today, one of the conversations I had with Marnie before we got together this week, we had a phone conversation last week, and one of the things I want to be sure of is that we have enough time for questions. When I've done this in the past, one of my issues is always, I'm going, I'm having a great time, and then I think, okay, we got time for questions, and it's 4:50 something. All right? And I'm the last thing between you and happy hour. That's a bad place to be. So I want to make sure we're done in time. So that last item on this list, the Fork and J Pal's path, is saved to whether or not you ask me that question during Q&A. So if you want to hear the Fed stuff, you're going to have to ask for it. Otherwise, what we will talk about are the first items there. How did we do in 2019? The answer is, manufacturing, it was a good 2019, but manufacturing wasn't necessarily a big part of that. As big a part of that as you might think. Then I want to talk about mood swings because if you're doing a forecast for 2020 and you're thinking about anything from an investment strategy where you want to buy some new machinery to you're thinking about your own plans regarding your retirement package that you're coming up with, mood swings are really important and things change really fast. And you should probably spend some time thinking about that. Then the biggest story of 2019 really, I think, particularly for manufacturing, but for many folks has been in fact the trade issue, which got resolved presumably about a month ago, but there's actually a little something in there, and it relates to the coronavirus story, which we cannot seem to get away from. It's everywhere, and we had a symposium on that at the university just last week, and I learned a lot. And I've been watching it all week and I've been learning even more. The story changes day to day. So I've tried to draw very few slides about coronavirus because I know next week they'll probably all need to change. So we'll get started right away then and get moving on that. How did 2019 go in manufacturing? That's our very first. How did we do with that? And I think the answer to that is told particularly by this graph. And this is the way I like to think about what's gone on in this area. First of all, there was a recession that nobody talks about. That recession was in 2016. How many of you were in the roles you have right now back in 2016? So there'll be people here with memories. Is your memory that was not the best of years? Yeah, it was not the best of years. I think, in fact, Marty, it was that 2017 was the first time I came to speak to you. And so you had just experienced that when you see me. And I think I was able to say, well, your 2017 has a chance to be a fair bit better than your 2016 was, because it was like, oh my gosh, we can't have another one of those. So I wanted to point out to you, this graph is actually a very broad measure of production in the manufacturing sector in the state of Minnesota. And what you see is, out of that mini recession of 2016, 2018 was really good. So when I talked to you folks last year, it was like, hey, you must be feeling pretty good. You guys had a pretty good 2018. You did all right. And so along came 2019, and you can see the rest of the graph over on the right. Not so hot. Production slid back. You aren't going backwards, but the chance to grow further from there was hindered by some things. And that the growth in the area has not been terribly strong. And here's the biggest problem with my graphic. When I dig into this number, I'm having trouble figuring out what sector it is that we're having issues with. So I've pulled this graph up for you. This is manufacturing employment. This is just the durable goods side is everything except for that last little bit down there at the bottom. There are 3,900 fewer workers in manufacturing in Minnesota at the end of 2019 than there was at the end of 2018. But if I dig in to say what's going on in each of the subsectors, and I particularly take time to dig in on durables, which I can see is that wood products were up, fabricated metals were up. I see some folks here that are in the metals area. I see some folks here in the electronics area. That's been up. Transportation equipment was reasonably up. Machinery was down in employment a fair amount. That's a pretty significant change there. The number one area where we've added employment has been in food, which is good, but when you think about where's your highest value added production and manufacturing, which is what that previous slide was about. So if I go back, let me go back to that slide a second, right? This is measuring value added in manufacturing. This is measuring the input of employment into manufacturing. That's the difference between those two graphs. And I can see that where all that action is something called all other durables, and it's hard to pick out exactly what that is. I have a couple ideas, but it's purely speculative. So maybe during a question or comment, if you would like to come up with, this is my explanation for what happened in 2019, you probably know more about this than I do. So I am absolutely happy to hear what your thoughts are on that. If you want to hear what mine are, I'd be happy to share those as well. And so if I look over the last 3 years and I just try to pull out each of the super sectors, manufacturing is the second from the bottom, you can see the largest one that's up there over the last 2 years, the one that sort of jumps right out at you is construction employment. Construction had a very good year. It was not so good in 2019 here, but in the other regional centers, including St. Cloud, construction did really well. So if you're doing something that's involved, that's providing an input into the construction industry, particularly if you're supplying into the greater Minnesota market, you've probably done okay. Because that sector of the economy has actually grown pretty significantly. Even though construction employment is down, almost all of that change, that down change, is actually in the Twin Cities market, the other regional centers. And to the extent that we can measure anything that we would call rural Minnesota, it looks like there's growth there too, but I know less about that than I might know about Mankato or Rochester or St. Cloud. Otherwise, you can see the bars dancing around. The gray bars are the most recent year. You can see the biggest gains were in leisure and hospitality. And then if I look at manufacturing, again, that piece on the second piece from the right, I think this little doohickey still works. Yeah, there it goes right there. There's manufacturing. You can see down in, there's that 3919 after smaller growths in 2017 and 2018. Now, to have had all that growth in GDP, manufacturing GDP, and have that small a change in manufacturing also tells me one more thing that is an important part of the manufacturing story. There has been a significant increase in the amount of investment in capital and in the technology that's being used along with it. So if you're trying to think about the story of what manufacturing has been so far, if you're producing inputs for other manufacturers, if you're in that machinery business, particularly in 2017, and I think most particularly in 2018, as the 2017 tax bill came in December, you saw a brief burst of increases of investment into machinery. There's some of that still there, but not as much. And the place where I see it the most, which I don't have time to get to today, has been a significant slide in commercial real estate, where I'm seeing pullback in some parts of the state, including here in the Twin Cities market. So that might be, that's indicating to me that whatever the burst was that came out of the tax bill seems to have dissipated in 2019. And that might account for that little boomlet in 2018 and then the slide right back. But the count, there's more to it than that, as I'll tell you, as I'll show you in a moment. One more thing that's been happening, and this is another case where I'm going to say, this is one of these graphs that's like, I have good news and I have bad news. Okay? Good news. The number one thing that people talk about, including the newest National Federation of Independent Businesses report, which came out yesterday afternoon, is that the number one issue for small businesses and medium-sized businesses right now is finding qualified workers. It's still the major issue. Okay? When the economy's doing poorly, that no longer becomes a major issue. It's still the number one issue, but take a look at the slope of that most recent line. This is from our own, as Marnie mentioned, our St. Cloud Area Quarterly Business Report. So this is just a group of approximately 60 businesses in the St. Cloud area that we interview every quarter and have done so since 1998. And we ask them the very same questions since 1998. One of those questions being, tell me about the difficulty of finding qualified workers over the next 6 months versus how it's going to be today, and that's what the answer is here. It's the difference between the numbers who say it's going to be harder versus those who say it's going to be easier. But the fact that that number is coming down probably doesn't mean, in fact, that we're seeing more and more people that are jumping into the labor force. There are a few more, and I think I've got a graphic to that effect. But I think what it really says instead is that businesses have responded in a variety of ways to the difficulty hiring qualified workers in ways that make them think it's now less of a problem. So how have they in fact responded? Well, one of them is actually paying people more money. These numbers reflect, this is a national survey on compensation changes that's done by Indeed, which is a large company that does placement. And so the blue line is I've increased compensation over the last 6 months. The red line is I'm planning to increase my compensation over the next 6 months. And so one way in which businesses are saying it's not so hard finding qualified workers is they basically decided, all right, if I'm going to get qualified workers, I need to pay more. I'm just going to have to increase compensation packages. And that, in fact, has been happening, at least is how they're reporting it. That has led, if you look at the graph on the right, and this is one just for Minnesota, to an increase in the size of the labor force participation rate. We think that they're being pulled in by the possibility of higher wages. It may also be true, we have, I would say, more than anecdotal, but not really firm evidence, because if you think about it, it's kind of hard to prove. We have some evidence to indicate that businesses may be relaxing their standards in terms of who they would hire. So, for example, one piece of evidence that we do have is businesses who have for years insisted that someone had to have a bachelor's degree in hand in order to be hired to that position are now saying, well, maybe you don't need the bachelor's degree. And that, in fact, we have, so that's a bit of evidence. It's not conclusive in my mind, but it's at least out there. But at any rate, if you look at that, so those are two lines on the right. So you understand the one on the left. The one on the right, the blue line is the share of people who are either looking for work or are actually employed divided by the size of the population of over age 15. And then the orange line is the employment to population ratio. Those are the share of people who have a job. You will see, and this graph goes all the way back to the 70s. I put it back to 76. I may have told this story before, but it always bears repeating in my mind. What happened in that big run-up till 1998 wasn't a work. It was a particular group of individuals who decided they wanted to join the labor force, that they wanted to participate, and that, in fact, is women. The female labor force participation rate in 1975 became 50% after it was way higher than that during World War II. Then at the end of World War II, we had the great switch where men came back into the labor force from the war, and women who were in the labor force exited and started to create families. And with that rate went down into the 30s. It became 50 by 1974. It rose so that effectively now the male and female labor force participation rates are the same. What has happened since then is, basically since 1998, that labor force participation rate has plateaued in the 60s nationwide and around 70 here in Minnesota for both men and women. But for both men and women, but the number of men who are actually looking for work who are also between ages 25 and 54, prime age males, has slowly fallen over the last 20 years. Okay, that is a mystery. Lots of people want to do a lot of amateur sociology about what that's about. And I haven't heard a story yet that I actually think is more than just a story. One other thing that's happening that I think has had some real impact, and if you look at GDP numbers, I just wanted to mention Boeing for a second, because the impact of Boeing, particularly the decision now to suspend building 737s. Understand, in 2019, the economy continued to grow because Boeing continued to build airplanes through the year, even though they couldn't sell any after March 2019. The fleet was grounded after the second crash. The first crash happens approximately here. Where's September of 2018? Right here. So the first crash happens here. Here's the second crash here, and then we get this huge dip. That whole dip is the result. That whole dip is about the result. It's about 3/4 of that was because they stopped for a while, and they said, well, we got to put our workers back to work. The plane's going to fly someday. I mean, my gosh, the plane's going to fly. So they started to put it back on. That is starting to happen. This number is going to decrease in production. Okay, this number will fall over the next 6 months until they can get the plane recertified and get it back in the air. Okay? It's anybody's guess when that's going to happen. What really happened in this case was, and I'm not a transportation expert, but it's pretty clear to me that there was a breach of trust between Boeing and the FAA, and it's going to take some time to rebuild that. Okay, don't know when that's going to happen, but anyone that tells you the Boeing 737 will be back in the air like that, I think is dreaming. Okay, that's going to take a while, and that has implications for everybody that supplies parts to Boeing. Hold on to that thought, because that's the coronavirus story too. But the Boeing story is probably easier for us to understand because that's a single firm, and you can sort of trace that out pretty easily. Let me talk a moment about mood swings, all right? Because I want to talk about this because it's a presidential election year. And moods will change. We're watching a world where we see increased amounts of polarization. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about what causes polarization. That's another lecture. That's not today's lecture. But I want you to take a look at this particular graph, because there's two stories in this graph. I love this little picture, this little cable cartoon over here on my right, where I've got the consumer saying, I'm waiting for business to push, and the business person saying, no, I'm waiting for the consumer to push. I'm waiting for you to give jobs. No, I'm waiting for you to buy products. It's a classic chicken and egg argument story. But you can see what happened over here, right? When I first came to you in 2017, we had just entered the time with a new presidency. And I can tell you that in our work with Quarterly Business Report, when we were measuring business confidence, it went from down here to up here. Almost like a light switch. It's the best metaphor I have for it. It was simply like someone turned the lights on in a room. The consumer was far more skeptical at the beginning of 2017. So businesses were like, all right, this is happening. We're gonna get a tax cut passed. I got someone that's gonna invest in infrastructure. I got someone that's gonna get regulation off my back. This is gonna be great. And the consumer's like, yeah, we'll see about what's happening. Take a look at where we are right now. it's almost 180 degrees. Consumer confidence is very high. CEO confidence is actually quite low. Well, what's that about? Well, I suspect it's just a simple matter of mood swings. If you're a rational person, you watch the political landscape and you say to yourself, okay, I could end up with 4 more years of the current administration, and I know what I think about that. Okay, whatever it is that you think about that. It's not likely that's going to change in 21 if that person stays in office. And on the other hand, you've got somebody over here who could be one of a half dozen people, I think, effectively at this point. And they all have varying policies, and you're trying to weigh that. So guess what? Any rational CEO is saying, I have to be prepared for both possibilities. If I'm going to forecast what I'm doing in 2020, it means I've got to have some idea of what I'm doing in 2021. And to know what I'm going to do in 2021 is a function of what do I think policy will look like in 21. And you don't really necessarily know that. Here's the same sort of thing, just on a slightly different basis. You can see that, so I just basically separated those two graphs so that you can see it separately and indicated the point where President Trump's administration began, and you can just see the light switch on the right versus the slow, steady climb on the left. And so my point here is, in anything I'm talking about, you have to be prepared for the possibility that there's going to be a change in November, right? Because right now, everyone has to hedge their bets based on, well, I'm not sure. I might get this person, I might get that person. And you may think, well, I know who's going to win. But if you're rational with your money, you're going to hedge that bet. Because there's risk. Just as there was risk in 2016 that probably inhibited and in fact may have even caused that mini recession that we just discussed. So is it possible that there could be a mini recession of 2020? It's possible. It's a function of how you think about what 2021 might look like. In other words, the mood swing of 2020 is a function of what you think is going to happen in 2021. So don't just think 6 months ahead. You've got to at least think 9 months ahead. And frankly, what you need to do is think 2 to 3 years ahead. So with that, let me turn to the one major story that keeps on talking to us, and that's going to be the trade deals. Trade matters a lot to Minnesota, even though we're not that close to China, right? We're not on the West Coast. We still have a lot involved there. Just some facts from an article from the Star Tribune last August to indicate the deep connections that are there. So there are connections that are of 2 types. And if you are involved in China, you're probably involved in one of these 2 types. Either it is a market into which you sell your products, or it is a market in which you purchase inputs for the products you produce. And if you look up and down this list, okay, you can see some of each kind. So what do we know? We know that trade reduced in 2019 because of the on-again, off-again balance. Will there be a trade deal? Will there not be a trade deal? Are we raising tariffs? Are we not raising tariffs? And I'm not going to go through the litany of all the things. I'm not going to give you the history of the 2019 tariffs hither and yon, because frankly, we got more things to talk about than that. Okay? But what you can see is, and the way I like to think about it, frankly, is the one thing I can count pretty clearly is transportation units. Okay? I've got a brother that works for FedEx, okay? My father worked on a loading dock, okay? Logistics is in one way or another in my blood, okay? It's probably what paid for my way through college, in part because I learned at 17 how to drive a forklift because my dad needed me. So you can see there's rail car loads up on the upper right-hand page. There's intermodal transportation, the containers, the big containers. Look at 2019, it came down versus 2018 quite a bit. 2018 was a really good year for shipping. 2019, not so good a year. Okay, and you can see it in variety of places. So if I put those, so this is an annual basis, so you can have the bigger picture, but if you take a look over here on the right, this is just, the blue line's 2018, the red line is 2019, and we actually have a little glimpse into what 2020 has been so far, and very clearly it's a lot less than that. So in January, we signed this deal. The deal was supposed to be a short-run impulse that was going to help a number of items, manufactured. Okay, the trade deal defines, here's how many more products are going to be purchased from the United States in China in these various areas, and everyone's focused on the soybeans and the sorghum, but frankly, when I look at that graph, what's the number one thing I'm looking at is right here. Manufactured goods. The trade deal has provisions for U.S. manufacturers to sell more goods into the Chinese market. There's an expectation that that's to happen, and China indeed in the last 2 weeks has dropped some of its tariffs to try to encourage that production being brought into the marketplace. And everything approximately 3 weeks ago, this was going to be like my big slide. When I first started to work on this was going to be, I was going to do a drum roll before I put this up. Then this happened. This is from Johns Hopkins University. This appeals to me. It has numbers, and as you might guess, I'm an economist. I love numbers. But I'm also dean of the School of Public Affairs, and includes our Geographic Information Systems program, and I love maps too. So this has numbers and maps, so this really hits me in my sweet spot. My numbers are a day and a half old. Total deaths has actually gone up over 1,000 as of this morning. I will say, with all due respect to my friends in China, I do not have a dog in the debate about the Chinese government or anything like that. But I will say, the quality of the data that we're getting out of China about the number of deaths, the number of ill people, the number of recovered persons, I would take it with a gigantic grain of salt. Okay? Not because I think anybody is, not because I can show that someone is lying to us. Someone might be lying to us. I can't discount that to zero. But this is also a fog of war situation. You're getting information from disparate places in haphazard ways. There's no effective way in which you could actually count the number of people who have actually contracted the disease. You don't know if coronavirus caused that death or something else. So who classifies it is a function of basically who's doing the counting, and different people in different provinces and in different cities do counts differently, so we really don't know. The data is not as good as we would like it to be, so people that want to, so as much as I love numbers and I love pictures and all of that, it's kind of hard to say. The reason you should care about that for what you're doing is this. In that deal in January is this little piece. Okay? Are there lawyers in the room? No lawyers? None that will admit to it. That top piece is actually in the trade deal signed 3 weeks ago. It's a clause on page 76 of that, or 79. That's basically, and it's basically in every contract where you've got delivery happening between businesses in two countries. I'm going to bet if you have a contract with a business overseas, a clause that looks something like that is in your contract. It's called a force majeure clause. The force majeure clause basically says if something really wild happens because of natural disaster, the party that's affected by that is not bound by the terms of this contract. So all of the signing of what we've done there is potentially undone by force majeure. Okay? So if you put a big bet on, hey, the trade deal got signed, I'm sending lots of stuff to China, I don't know. I'm not sure that's true. But I'll tell you what, as much as you should worry about that, you should also look at what you're doing right now to say, how much is my supply chain dependent on what's happening in China? Okay, that strikes me as being a serious issue. Okay, so take a look at this, right? Look at all these countries and look at how they're impacted by by the connections of the global supply chain that's coming out of China. For the US, that ratio is in the 30s. 30% of the inputs used by manufacturers in the United States come from China. Is that you? Is that your company? And if it is, what's your plan? You have to look at, so what can you do? How should you be prepared? I would say there's a few things. And this comes from a presentation that was done. We had I think I mentioned, we had a colloquium last week where we had 5 individuals talk about coronavirus in China, and basically what could we do in St. Cloud. And I asked the question, okay, there are a few people in this audience who came from businesses in St. Cloud. What advice would you give them? And these are some of the ideas that I've seen. First, okay, prevention and containment, okay? Look at your third-party suppliers, how many of them are in China, and maybe make the phone call. Hey, is this bothering you? Right now, a number of Chinese firms are working at about 10% of their labor force. That's all they can get come back into the plant. Okay? My dad worked in a plastics plant. I know if they only had 10% of the people there, they couldn't turn the machines on. So that's an issue. Along with that, so there's prevention and containment, constant monitoring, and then diversification. Look, the uncertainties caused by the trade debate over the last 3 years, if they've gotten you to do anything to say, should I still be using this Chinese supplier? Right? I'm not here to tell you you should or shouldn't. That is a personal decision based on what your situation is. How good is that thing? Are there any substitutes that are available to you? Okay, but you ought to be, the point is have a plan so that if you actually need to diversify, because you can no longer rely on that supplier, because that supplier happens to be in Hubei province, which has been the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, you probably ought, if you haven't got one of those yet, that's probably on your to-do list. If I did one thing today, I'd put it there. So with that, again, I'm gonna say because we give this time for questions. 443. I did a little better than past years. Okay, it's likely another sideways year, just like 2019. If anything, maybe even a little slower. That's not great, but particularly given what's just happened with coronavirus, there's no way to predict this. But I can tell you that we're going to have some impact of that. Our best guess is right now GDP in the United States in the first quarter is impacted by about 1/2 to 3/4%. Where we thought it would be 2%, we now think it'd be 1/4 to 1.5% due to the coronavirus interruption. Some of that you'll get back in the second quarter. In the third quarter, there's going to be a catch-up period, but that's assuming that everything goes really well and that the virus disappears in the next 6 weeks and so forth. We don't know that. Exposure to China is an issue. I think exposure, I think aircraft will be a challenge because we have no idea when Boeing will come back online. Construction business should stay strong in 2019. I absolutely believe, in 2020. I think the construction industry still has room to grow. I don't have time to talk about why I believe that. The reason I put the Fed to the side and said you could ask a question if you want to is because, frankly, Fed policy is going to be, we're not doing anything. I know people want to say they're going to cut rates once. I know at some point they thought they were going to cut rates twice. The Fed does not want to get involved in the election. They're going to want to stay out of it as much as they can. Trump tweeted it, Powell today, during his testimony, you should be cutting rates, there should be negative rates. Trust me, the more the president tweets at Jay Powell, the less Jay Powell wants to respond. I'm saying they're on hold for the year, so forget that. Okay? Your labor market will stay tight. If anything, it's going to get tighter. Wages are rising, and businesses near you are actually looking at the qualifications they're asking for in their hires, and may in fact be reducing the number of qualifications they need to have. And then the last piece, which is really important, you saw how high consumer confidence is. That's the indicator I'm watching. As long as that stays where it is right now, I do not see a recession in 2020. But if that thing turns around and actually heads toward where the CEOs are, those bets are off. With that, we've got 14 minutes for questions, which might be my record. What do you have for me? Looking for a hand. I'm sorry, I'm walking around on you. I made your life really easy in the past year.
You have.
Now I've got the wandering hands. I got one in the back. Thank you, sir.
I was wondering about your graph about the CEO versus the consumer confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like each time there has been a divergence in the CEO's
Mhm.
confidence goes down while consumer confidence goes up, it's heading toward a recession.
It does. It does. Look, we're in the late period of expansion, right? Meaning that a recession will come. Okay, recessions have not been repealed. All right, they will happen. I know the president would like you to believe that, but every president wants you to believe that. That's not unique to President Trump. And recessions don't die of old age, right? Now, normally they're murdered by policy. Sometimes fiscal or regulatory, sometimes by monetary policy. The Great Recession really was a monetary policy failure of a particular sort. The 2000 recession was also, monetary policy has probably caused 5 of the last 7 recessions. I can only think of a couple that I would say, yeah, monetary policy didn't have anything to do with that. So it's not purely a monetary phenomenon, but mostly a phenomenon. Monetary policy right now has some really challenging things, but I'm not going to give you all of the monetary policy slides I have unless someone asks the question more directly. Okay, that's a tease, but if you want to talk about something else, I'm happy to talk about something else. We don't need to talk about that. What else would you like to ask?
So, in one of your slides, you saw it was 50,000 jobs were lost in 2019.
Yep.
So on the commercial real estate, I feel numbers all day.
Mm-hmm.
And 2019 was an historic year.
Yeah.
It's sitting around 4 to 5% vacancy rates in the industrial sector. There was 4 million square feet of positive absorption. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the slides. I
So
saw
do you
was-
specifically do industrial?
That's all.
That's all you do is industrial, okay. So when I say CRE's had a bad year, it's not just industrial, okay? Now, if you're in the mall space, it's been a pretty hideous year, okay? I don't need to, okay. I would agree with you, industrial building has done pretty well. I also serve I still also serve as president of the Economic Development Authority for the city of St. Cloud. It's not on, Marnie gives me enough accolades, I don't need to add that. But I will say, we've seen significant growth on the industrial side, but at the same time, we've had building after building go vacant in retail. It's been challenging. We've seen a lot of churn in leisure and hospitality. There's been a significant increase in the number of beds in St. Cloud, which I'm interested in because, who's sleeping in there, right? What's the demand for those beds? Well, it's a bet on the convention business. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, I don't know. But if it wasn't for the convention business and a couple of very large public projects in St. Cloud, like Tech High School, I think we would have had a down year in commercial construction in St. Cloud. It was really sort of overshadowed by the fact that we had this one very large public building, about $110 million project that just swamped all the other numbers. But particularly on the mall side, we're having some real issues, and I think that's there. But for industrial, I would agree with you. I agree with that assessment that industrial's done really well.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the manufacturing sector in general. I feel heavy growth. I guess the feeling I got in 2019 by looking at your slides was a little different.
It is. It's different. We're seeing significant decreases. I'm waiting. I say this every year. One thing that we always do is I show you these slides in February with these data that we have. Somewhere in the 3rd week of March, Deed's going to go back and revise all those numbers from the previous 2 years. And so I can tell you a story today, a month from now, if I was to draw that graph a month from now, it'll be entirely different. I don't know. But basically right now from what I see this large drop. It's in durables. It's not in the sectors I had before. In fact, give me a second. I'm going to flip back to that graph so we can talk about it. some in machinery, some in that miscellaneous area, but that other thing that says all other durables, you know what's in there that I haven't got, that I haven't broken out because I can't get the data for it, for the state as a whole, although I could get it for St. Cloud in particular? Optical. And it could be that, I don't know. It's down in St. Cloud, but I have no idea what the optical business looks like in the Twin Cities right now for manufacture of optical products. Ophthalmic, is that the word? I don't know how to pronounce that word. So that is, that's there, but you can see, right? The machinery down 400, the machinery has really been the only issue. Now, for us, but my point is where those people are moving, and one thing that is clearly, that could be explaining what this is about, from that is the following. How many of you take advantage of temporary services for workers on the production side? Go ahead, hold your hands up for a second. Marnie wanted to see. Okay. I'm here for Marnie. Okay. So, all right, thanks. If you hire a temporary worker, they're actually listed as a professional or business service. Temp help is not counted in manufacturing. I wonder how many of those people who are working in these places right now have sort of converted to the temporary or contract work rather than being hired as a permanent worker. I don't know that. That might explain some of what that number is in there. I don't know. So I've actually got to call into my friends at D to sort of say, okay, what's going on here? But right now, they're busy doing all that revising of the last 2 years of data, and they won't answer my phone call. And they just sort of like, okay, call me in March. Okay, question over here.
Would there be any correlation between the ability to attract labor and the cost of that labor and using more automation, more equipment to get the work done? You noted it in the value of the goods being produced versus the employment.
I think one thing that's truly happened over the last 5 years has been this increase in investment. What's that investment about? Okay, labor's tight. We all know labor's tight. People are still complaining, businesses are still telling us, my hardest problem is I can't find qualified labor. So they're going to work in a number of directions. You don't just do one strategy, right? You do a mix of strategies. And in the short run, your mix of strategies is, oh, all right, I'll hire this person who's still got a year and a half to go to tech college. Okay, oh, all right, I'll pay an extra 50 cents an hour. But your long-run strategy is probably an investment strategy. I'm going to invest in automation. I'm going to make, which is good for those who get the jobs. Because when you invest in automation, every worker becomes more productive. And when they become more productive, you can afford to pay them more. That's great for those who have the jobs. And if it's true that there simply are no other workers out there for us to get, then that's the answer, and that's a fantastic answer. But what if those other workers are there, they're sitting on the sideline, and you invested in automation and say, you all stay there on the sideline? And they say, well, but then the great American dream is not available to me. I can't get the great job at your place of business. That's kind of one of those stresses that's happening in America that I think accounts for some of our more socio-political issues that we see. Other questions? See, aren't these better than talking about the Fed? This is awesome. Keep going. I just talked you all out of it. You got 5 minutes. Oh my gosh. There we go. Hi.
How does USMCA overlay with the coronavirus and some of the supply chain here? You didn't mention USMCA.
I didn't mention USMCA, okay, which is a good point. Well, part of it is I only have about 40 minutes to get through this talk, 35 minutes to get through this talk. And part of that is USMCA matters significantly to us in Minnesota, right? Who's our #1 trading partner? It's not China, it's Canada. And this year, who's our #2 trading partner? It's not China, it's Mexico. Okay. We are oriented in that direction. The reason I didn't focus on it is quite simple. USMCA really didn't do very much regarding how Minnesota reacts to those two places. It has impacts on the dairy industry that are significant, but are really concentrated in Wisconsin. Why Wisconsin? I have some ideas. They might be political. Okay? It has some other stuff that I like. I've got parts I really don't like of USMCA from a trade policy perspective, but it has some stuff I really like, particularly the fact that digital trade is not discussed in any way, shape, or form in the original NAFTA. Because digital trade didn't exist in 1994, so we didn't have any plans for it. So we had to update it. And basically what they did was they took the TPP, the trade partnership, of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that the Trump administration, when they came in 2017, said, we're not going to do that. We're not doing TPP. But they took the digital trade stuff that was in TPP and they stuck it into USMCA. I say, yes, that's great. I'm happy for that. And on balance, I think USMCA was a good thing, not a bad thing. There's bad stuff in there. Okay, there's some stuff I really don't like in there. But on balance, because we got a model now for digital trade that we can now take USMCA and take that to other places and say, why don't we put this language, this section, into the deal with the UK that we want to write? Or why don't we do this? Why don't we do this with our treaties with South Korea and Japan? Why don't we do that? Those would be good things. So on balance, I'm going to say moderately happy with USMCA, but the impact of Minnesota, I just don't think it's very large. One more question. Who wants that one question? Okay?
Talking more about labor.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with, I think just off the top of my head, these 4 unions that they didn't strike, they voted to strike in the last 6-8 months.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have the ability to do it now.
Yeah.
Because of the labor force. What's that going to, how's that going to affect everything in 2020, 2021?
So one thing I'll say as an economist, the other I'll say as a political observer. The economist part of it is this, pretty simple. You're most likely to see increased wages even more so than we thought before. The unions are simply responding to the incentives. A tight labor market, businesses are showing that they're willing to increase wages. People look at the success of the strike in the auto industry in 2019 and they say, okay, we should try that again. And so I think that's going to happen, right? I would say that they're going to be encouraged to do so because that kind of discord and strife makes it easier to organize politically for the 2020 elections. So I think there are going to be forces from outside that are actually going to increase that amount of tension in the U.S. market in an election year versus what they might do if it was 2021. So I expect that, I actually absolutely agree with you. I expect what we saw in the auto industry is going to get replicated in some other places in 2020. And if anything, it will increase. But I think that's going to end up being a one-year phenomenon. I think in 21 that'll subside, regardless of the result of the election. And there was your one last question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What did you guys think? It was great, right? We might have him back for a 5th year in a row. After the election. Thank you so much, Dr. Banaian. Really, really appreciate that. So I know I am the last bastion between you and a cocktail, so I'll keep it really, really brief. Mark your calendar for our next Gears and Gadgets. It's going to be on May 11th. And for those of you who filled out our survey of what topic would be of prime interest to you, thank you very much. You might think that Dr. Banaian and I had partnered up on this, but actually we are going to have a great program. It is going to address the issue of talent acquisition and retention in manufacturing. We are going to have a panel discussion and a roundtable discussion led by Mary Nutting. Mary, where are you? Right there, thank you. Who is the president and founder of Core Talent and one of our valued sponsors. And Core Talent provides talent attraction and retention services to manufacturing companies. So we'll have an expert moderating our panel, and we will assemble a panel of manufacturing executives who are deeply immersed in the talent acquisition and retention arena, and they are going to share with you some success stories, tips, and ideas for you to attract that talent that's so hard to find these days. And of course, we are also going to have our fun brews and barbecue summer party in July, so stay tuned for that. So again, thank you all so much for attending today. Thank you, Dr. Banaian. Please go out and have a hot hors d'oeuvres. I've been cooking all day, so I hope you really enjoy them. And thank you for attending. Thank you so much.